This week we're painting some chunky flame boys, the Aggressors. Roll the music. Hello and welcome to yet another Scuffed Hammer video. My name is Hammer, and today, as I said earlier, we're painting some Aggressors. I'll actually be finishing off my squad by painting the last 3 models for a squad of 6. And these were actually some of the first models I painted when I got back into the hobby over a year and a half ago. So today's video will be a bit of a test to see if I have grown and what I can do to push myself into being better. Starting with the 3 models I've already painted. One of these is pretty good, but the other 2 are pretty chunky. But a bit more on that later. For these new models, I bought them secondhand and they were already built, which means, against my personal decision, they all have bare heads. So after checking them out and making sure any of the mold lines were removed, it's time to get them primed up and ready to paint. For these models, I'm trying out for the first time the Army Painter's Savage Green airbrush paint, opposed to my regular AK Interactive mixture. And if this colour works out well, it'll save me a bunch of time as I won't have to mix the colours I want and it'll just be all in one nice neat little bottle. Once that airbrush green is down, it's time to pick out all the parts with silver. This is an area where I really think I can improve from my last models. On my last ones, I just chucked some silver on and called it a day. But this time I'm planning on taking the time to pick out the separate wires, do them a different colour, and then put a wash over the silver so it isn't so bright and glaring against the rest of the model. I've decided to steer away from my typical Adrax Earthshade and instead use Rattling Grime. This really dirties up the look, takes out the sheen of the metal, and makes it look like there's a layer of oil and grime over the top of it that comes from constant use. Then it's on to picking out the wires. I've gone with orange because it's the same colour that I use for the fuel tanks on my Infernus Marines. And it feels right to be consistent with something like that since it is from the same army. Now, while I pick out a bunch of details with brown so I can paint them gold, why don't I tell you a little bit about how I use these guys on the field of battle. These guys are pretty tough. I'm talking toughness 6 with a 3-up save tough. I pretty much always use these guys in a group of 6 unless I'm running a 1k game, along with a captain in Gravis armor, who is pretty much exclusively used for the -1 CP to any stratagem that I use, which comes in handy when I can add devastating wounds to all flamers, which on their own are already pretty good at d6 plus 1 hits, strength 4, 0 AP, 1 damage, which in the detachment I run becomes strength 5, and because of their datasheet ability, their armor penetration becomes -1 if they attack the closest eligible target. Add on top of that these are twin linked so I can re-roll the wound rolls if I don't like it, and they have some pretty respectable melee with 3 attacks each, 3 up, strength 8, -2, 2 damage, also twin linked. Going back to the painting, I'm going to pick out some of these smaller details, which previously I had just painted brown to make it look like leather, or I just blended it into the gold so it just looked like one big amorphous glump. Moving on to the skin. Luckily with salamanders, you don't need to try too hard since their skin is onyx black. So I'll start off with a bit of Black Legion contrast and then I'll move on to using the same for the black carapace. Then to make the skin look a little bit different from the black carapace, I use a bit of Army Painter's dark skin shade, which helps differentiate it just a little bit before using some red ink to pool into the recesses of their eyes, as also in canon, their eyes are just one big solid glowing orb of red. And to keep things consistent across my army, I'll paint the cybernetic eye lens yellow. Moving on to the second last big detail is Corvus Black, which will be used on the shoulder pads and the backpacks. Now, for whatever reason, I can just never get this paint to thin down just the way I like it. It's always just a little bit too thick or a little bit too thin. I can just never get the ratio right, despite being able to get hundreds of other paints correct. So you may notice a little bit of variation between the 3 models, as when I've had to go back and get some more paint out and get it ready, I've just not been able to get it the same consistency for whatever reason. If you have a theory on why I just can't get this one color correct, drop it down below, and please, I'll try anything. Any suggestion you've got, I'll try, because it is driving me mad and I use it on nearly every model. Before moving on to the last big color, time to do a bit of touch-ups with some Warpstorm Glow. And it's here where I find out that the color that I used through the airbrush at the beginning of the video is almost a perfect match, which is amazing. Once those touch-ups are done, I can move on to doing the final step of the armor, which is using some Mantis Warrior contrast all over the green and making it just pop just that little bit more. Doing this step with this model was a little bit harder than a couple of my previous ones, as there were just so much more little bits that I had to be careful of as opposed to your stock standard Marine. And in the end, it all turned out well because by sticking it through and being patient, it looks amazing. This is one of my favorite parts about painting salamanders and a bunch of flamers. It's the heat stress. Now, generally when I show you a paint, it's because I'm just showing you what I've used and it's just easier to follow along with your own colors. However, this is one of those times where I have to say the paints that I've shown you, you just have to use because I have not found any other alternative. And those paints are Druchii Violet, Seraphim Sepia, and Drakenhof Nightshade. This time with my bases, I tried a different way of applying them on by using a dabbing technique rather than a spreading and pushing technique. And it seemed to work quite well, both for the way it dried and the effects it made, and also for keeping the model cleaner and not dirtying up the model in any unintended ways. Meaning I didn't have to waste time by wetting an old paintbrush and going back and wetting off the acrylic paint before it dried, and then quickly dabbing it away with a bit of toilet paper. This is my final boss of model painting. It's decals. Decals and I have not been friends in the past, but if I want to make these models better than the last lot I did, I have to give them a go. And by having tried out a bunch of different techniques, I've finally found one that works for me. I started by putting a layer of Ard Coat on the shoulder pads and then letting it dry. Then I soaked the decals until they became completely pliable. After I placed them on the shoulder pad, I took a makeup wedge and I pressed out all of the water and then applied some micro set, also squeezing the excess out with a makeup wedge and setting it in place. Now, because on the right shoulder I like to layer my decals, I decided to do the flame first, move over to the left and do the head of the dragon, and then move back over to the right and put the little 3, which indicates which company the Marine is from, which in this case is the third company, because the third company is the true representation of Flamer and Melter. And then to finish it off, I remove the shiny look of the Ard Coat using some matte varnish from Army Painter. This also has an added benefit of sealing down the decal and making sure it's not going to go anywhere. Then, to wrap it all up, I'm going to place down the technical paint before the bottom layer finishes drying, as that's just going to pull it a little bit further and make some more defined cracks, which is really going to enhance the look of striding across a lava field. Then to wrap it up neatly, right at the end, I'm going to chuck some black paint that you can get at any paint store on the rims, and with that, it's about time for a final reveal. Well, that just about wraps up today's video. Up in the top left corner you can see the difference between the new model and the old model. I think that I have massively improved over the past year and a half. If you think so, drop a comment down below and tell me how good I went, or if you think that I did badly, tell me below as well. There is always room for improvement, and I really hope that this shows you guys just how much you can improve by putting in the hard work and staying consistent. Because I've done nothing special to reach this level, all I've done is stay consistent, push myself with new techniques whenever they are applicable, and make the painting process as easy as possible so that I actually feel enjoyed and excited to paint. Thanks for sticking around to the end. My name's Hammer, and I'll see you in the next one.